Wow. I mean, I think that the glottis stroke is, I mean, you mean as a means of...
If the voice is tired, that's just like...
To use the glottal then? I would.
Without phonation, though, without phonation.
You mean sort of a...
Right.
sound.
Right.
I wouldn't do it because what you're doing is bringing the chords together in a very... the edges of the chords are being brought together at the very time when I think you would want to rest them. That also brings up the whole business of vocal fry.
Yeah.
You know, does everybody know what vocal fry is? That's that sound, you know. And some people maintain that that is helpful. I see no evidence for that. In fact, I think it's just a prolonged bad onset.
Prolonged bad onset.
That's a bad onset. That's a vocal fry, is it? But there's some people who feel that's a very useful thing. There's some people who say that that strengthens the ligament. Well, I have no reason to believe that it does. I don't think there's been any research done to do that. Also, the lip trill, which is so popular in New York. These days, you pay $140 for your lesson, and you come in and you rag doll for 5 minutes, and you lip trill for another 5, and so that's, you know, it takes care of a lot of the time. I mean, lip trill is, if your lips are tense, the lip trill would help you, but are your lips tense? You know, and there's nothing wrong with that, but to do that as though that were the key to good vocalism seems to me to be an exaggeration. I have no objection to it, but I do not build a lot on the lip trill. I do build a lot on the tongue point trill, things like that, because that really has an effect on the laryngeal action and on the tongue itself, and getting freedom in the tongue. Some more questions on health matters. Yes, ma'am.
Sounds like a very long question. I have a very serious question about vowel modification.
Why don't you go down here so we can hear you, Ben, so everybody else
For
can.
questions on vowel modification.
I wrote down all of it. I show you this, maybe helping us to understand modification. Vowel modification, when I observe the spectral difference between dominant and prominent, you showed us yesterday. My observation is difference between them is different energy concentrations. But I don't know how vowel modification occurs.
Oh, well,
so balancing energy concentration level on the signal performance, or simply adjusting length of frequency?
those are good questions. You're talking about the 4 tenors that we
Yeah, but most interesting to me is difference between Pavarotti and Domingo. Both of them are singers, but
right. Well, okay. What we were talking about there, I mean, both are very, as far as the energy level goes, I think anyone who's singing in that part of the voice is going to use a high level of breath energy and the physical energy itself. So I think the energization is probably pretty much the same. Our point in that was to mention that, for example, Domingo tends to modify the vowel toward the high part of the scale. In other words, if he's singing pensiero, he's singing pensiero. And instead of la speranza, la spe, he's saying la spi, very high. Whereas Pavarotti and Vierling simply use the vowel by opening the mouth, modifying the vowel by opening the mouth. If I sing la spe, I'm still saying an A vowel, but my mouth is open. Here's a perfect example. Let me show you what I mean by that. If I were to sing the Boy Mario down here, you just stay there. Just stay there. You're fine. I want to follow through with the rest of your questions. If I say La Speranza, I'm saying La Speranza. My mouth is practically in the speech inflection range. If you notice, there's a difference between this note and this note even. If I say La Speranza, I don't say Ranza, because the mouth is too far open. Now, if I did it up here and I'll just falsetto, of course, by the same shapes, watch me, if you would. Would you watch me? So I can show you what I mean. If I'm doing it down here, I say La Speranza. Up here it's this. La Speranza. vowel is opening the mouth. It's the same vowel, but I've opened my mouth. Now, what happened with Domingos, he did this. Lost me. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but he closed his mouth and had a very high A vowel. Whereas Corelli said this. Lost, you know, was an A vowel. It was lost, like that. He's modifying it down the scale rather than the other way. Whereas both Pierling and Pavarotti keep the vowel pure by opening the mouth and still saying the vowel A. So the modification comes because as you go up the scale, for example, that A is not the same A. If I go lost A, it's much closer to an F or an E, than to an A. And so it's modifying downward by virtue of opening the mouth. My point in that whole study was to talk about the fact that you don't have to make a mechanical change. You don't have to do something with the larynx, especially, in order to modify the vowel. The same is true with the, if you notice, when we did the little study of the female voice, what I was mentioning there is that particular singer, once you got to the high A, used the universal vowel. She sang, she didn't use any enunciatory action of her mouth at all. And if she'd sung, then you have the vowel modification. What's the rest of your question? Do you have some more on that?
And also there's a question. Do you think where singers' performance lie exactly? Performance, third performance and the fourth performance, or higher than singer's performance?
Well, the singer's format is often, for example, with Sundberg, he often refers to the third format as being the singer's format. But what we have discovered is that with almost all fine singers, there's very frequently a third, fourth, and fifth format as well. And the relationship of the third, fourth, and fifth is often what determines the timbre of the voice, the beauty of the voice. So that you have, of course, the fundamental, and the first format is what gives the depth to the voice. The second format is largely the vowel-defining format, together with the first format. And then the third, fourth, and fifth format are those formats which bring brilliance to the voice.
So, yes, my observation is Pavarotti has a higher format.
Well, again, you have to be very careful to draw too many conclusions from even a study like that, because first of all, even recording techniques vary from period to period, and so on. However, I think it is true. I think you're absolutely right that Pavarotti probably has some additional harmonics even above the third, fourth, and fifth format that we hear. Sometimes it's a noisy sound. Yeah. In it as well, sometimes. And so I think and you don't see that in Mr. Pierling, for example. Good. Okay. Right. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something. On high notes, should you keep the vowel sound up there, like on a high A? Should I think A and just open the mouth?
There should be vowel integrity. The integrity of the vowel should remain, but it will be modified. Do you remember somebody was singing the other day, Aki Schütz? And of course you have to sing Liebe on a B flat. And I mentioned that, you can't sing Lava, you can't just open your mouth and sing an A vowel, but you can sing Liebe. You can open your mouth and sing the E, and that modifies it. You don't have to drop the jaw in an A position when you get up there. A lot of people have been taught in the soprano voice that every time after you get to the G, that everything from there on is an and that's not necessary, because you can still have some vowel integrity while modifying the vowel. Of course, if you don't modify, the reason you want to modify is that if you have the conjoining of a front vowel such as E plus a high pitch, it's going to be too shrill because you have high pitch and high vowel. So you have to modify it in some way. And on the other hand, the modification in the female voice, it seems to me, is less drastic than it is in the male voice up there.
It was really basically saying that the vowel will modify itself by virtue of opening the mouth.
Yes.
You don't need to do anything else.
Not totally the case. You have to sometimes actually think if you're singing ah that it's not going to be an ah.
Yeah.
But the process is the same. If I say ah and I drop my jaw, I'm going to be more in the ah position. And so opening the mouth, what I like to say is that in the speech inflection range, you sing as you speak. As the scale goes up, the mouth opens for power and for tessitura, so that the degree of mouth opening depends upon the vowel, the tessitura, and the intensity. Yes.
I wanted to ask a question about, I sang into the machine and I saw the first one, second one, and third one rather clearly. But with the really great singers, of course, it cut off of the third. And I saw the mess up above that. And I'm wondering, is that bad in the tone? Is that what you're...
Well, let me tell you again. This can be partly room ambience noise, room ambient noise. It can be a whole lot of other things. But in general, what we see is that if there is excessive noise in the voice, it will register a lot above the 4,000.
And noise is?
Well, non-harmonic partials. In other words, that you have a fundamental, and then every harmonic is an integer of that basic, it's in that system. Whereas if we go, for example, there's a lot of other partials in there that I don't want. That's got a whole bunch of, a stack of harmonics that don't really belong. And so that's a noise element. Also, nasality will register as a noise element. And if you go like that, you're going to see a very different spectrum than if you sing in a normal way. But again, let me tell you something. We have to be very careful about what we see, how we interpret the spectrum that we see in the laboratory. Because first of all, we don't know everything, quite seriously. And there are times when it depends on how close you are to the microphone. All those factors enter into it. So I think you have to be very careful about drawing conclusions. And did any of you do printouts? Did you do printouts for any people of their phonation? Good.
Some people videotaped also.
And videotapes as well. Good. Very good. Happy to hear that. Yes, sir.
I was curious. It seems that the zonally massage in the female voice is not quite as wide.
The what?
The zonally massage in the
Oh, yes, right.
is not quite as wide as that in males. Is that because the female voice sounds generally the range is an octave higher?
Yeah, well, to begin with, you see, it has also to do, if you remember, in a certain way, the long middle range is E flat 4 and F sharp 5 in the typical soprano. And then about C sharp 5, that is the C sharp above middle C, there's a sort of a subdivision, and I call that upper middle and the other lower middle. And in point of fact, you see the female very often inflects her voice clear up to that C sharp area, and she talks sometimes a little bit like that, and so forth. And so that is part of her speech mechanism as well. Whereas we don't do that. We don't speak up that high. It's almost impossible for a male to carry up to that upper middle voice. The female can. And I think that has to do with the laryngeal construction itself. It also has to do with the angle of the vocal folds. And I don't know. I am not smart enough about this to look into a larynx and say it's male or female. I mean, I really can't. But I'm told that if you really know how to examine very carefully the pitch of the way in which the arytenoids are fashioned, that you can indeed determine if it's male or female larynx. I don't really see much difference. But I think that that's partly what the Passaggio business is about. Is that, it's a different construction, slightly. Yeah. Yes.
I have two questions. One is that we get in our studio often young or inexperienced singers who have no notion of sound, or former pop singers. I think we get some of those. And to sing with a high larynx and everything that goes with that. So that's my first question. How do
what?
So, that don't Martin?
Oh, yes, sure. Yes, actually, that was one of the questions asked. I am going to get to those questions. Let me answer that one first because that's the easiest one to answer. Well, you know, Martin was actually a person. I mean, he was a baritone. In fact, the L'Heure Espagnole that role was written from Martin. And Martin was a person who could sing very low and very, very high. And so the French developed a sort of category called baritone Martin. And that's one of those very, very rangy voices. Probably that's someone who could have been either a tenor or a baritone. And there is such a category. As I mentioned before, a lot of baritones can sing just as high as tenors. I mean, I'm talking about professional singers. However, they usually can't sing it with the same endurance because the passaggio is basically lower. And I want to come back to that point about tenors and baritones in a minute. If I forget it, remind me. So sure, there is such thing as a baritone like that. I think it's rather rare. And your other question was about
Young singers, experience.
yeah, with pop singers with a high larynx.
Yeah.
Well, here again, a lot of that has to do, with head posture. It has to do with all of this. If you raise your head like this, the larynx is going to go up. A lot of young people, the lights these days are all up there. It's not a footlight situation anymore. It's all the lights are from above, and the pop singers, and they're always looking up. They're always doing this, right, wiggling and jiggling, and with the beads and everything. I have not dealt a lot with pop singers. I mean, trying to get people to get out of that, but I have sometimes used rather extreme things, particularly with males who have high laryngeal position. I actually have them put their fingers here and speak and sing and see that the larynx not go up. I mean, they're not pushing it down, but they're checking to see where it is. I also do this a great deal with people. I don't know if I did here or not. Put the little finger at the temporomandibular joint, the rest of the hands here. Feel that the head stay exactly like this and the larynx not mount. Even do this to see that the larynx not mount, to stay in that position. I want to pick up on something that remind me of baritones and tenors and the range business. It's very curious. Tenors all have a reputation for being strange people, which is ill-founded. We are very nice people. If you take the Bohème score in hand, and you look at the role of Marcello, and you look at the role of Rodolfo. Marcello's second passaggio is E flat. Rodolfo's is G. So you tell me how many notes does Marcello have to sing in the whole opera above E flat? You can count them on two hands. How many does Rodolfo have to sing above G, which is his comparable passaggio? It's no easier for the tenor to sing more in the upper voice beyond the second passaggio than it is for the baritone. Yet look at the writing. I mean, Rodolfo has B flat, A, over and over and over again, C. And so what I'm saying is that there is a greater, one can explain why there are so many crazy tenors, because the responsibility of that is tremendous. Take almost any score and it's the same way. If you think about it, the passaggio events are equal in every voice. It's just that in the baritone they're a third lower than in the tenor, or a fourth lower than the tenor in the bass baritone, and a fifth lower, basically, in the bass. And yet, the amount of writing, which is above the passaggio, is tremendous for the tenor in general. I just wanted to throw that in. Matt.
One thing we haven't discussed this week is how to teach a female music theater student, someone who needs to sing with a more developed sound.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't have to do that. Now, there are people, who feel, let's see, were you in school when Kathy Shavola was here? Chiavola?
I was here.
Okay, now, Kathy, she calls herself Shivola. She has made quite a wonderful career out of teaching pop singers how to sing correctly. She's in Nashville, and this is where she makes her living. And I've often discussed this with Kathy, just did recently when I was in Nashville. And she said, I insist that first they have to get proper vocal technique going. But then they can make some change from that. I'll also tell you this, I have a couple of people who are rather large figures in the musical comedy area. Judy Kuhn is one. I don't know if you know who that is or not, but were you here when she was here?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Judy's having a big career now. She was the Pocahontas, and she was in Les Mis, she was the big star in that. But she, when she was here, she had a very, very nice vocal technique. A relatively small instrument, if you remember, but a very pretty one. She sang, I can remember what she sang in her senior recital. She sang a wonderful set of Duparc Melodie, sang it very beautifully. And she says over and over to people that the only reason she can sing musical comedy is because she learned how to sing. And I think that is true. I really am not a good person to try to advise anybody about how to do that, because I don't do it. There are people in the NATS organization who specialize sort of in dealing with pop singers and who try very hard to alleviate the misuse, because it is often misuse. And of course, the largest clientele, as Tom will tell you, in any ENT's office, is the so-called professional untrained singer. The untrained professional. You see, there's so many of those out. And those are the people who really do themselves great damage. One thing that is true is that in all of that, if you have kids who are in shows like that, be sure that the backup stuff is not so loud, or that they are properly mic'd or whatever, because they're trying to compete with all the noise of a band behind them. It's even worse than that. Yes, ma'am.
If I can just speak to that, I do that. I teach pop and jazz and music theater, and I've been doing that for 14 years, and I use the daily regimen, all the things that Richard advises, that healthy vocalism comes first, just to back that up. I mean,
What do you do with somebody who really wants to carry chest up very far?
Well, I personally work much more with, rather than doing that, because it's not a healthy, I don't think it's a healthy choice. I encourage them to perhaps have a little less vibrancy in the tone, and sometimes even just going for a slightly more nasal sound, to just avoid any of that kind of heavy mechanism of bringing chest voice up. I mean,
Well, by doing the nasal sound, you're probably relieving some of the laryngeal tension, I suppose.
Yeah.
So you have singing head voice, but...
Yeah, and encourage them to go for perhaps a louder sound, but in head voice. And I'm still working through that, but I'm certainly not advocating that you carry that chest voice up. I think you can come up with a credible sound with less peril to the instrument. I don't think it comes without a cost, but I think you can make it less than what it would be if you were carrying chest voice up. So
Good.
those are some things I do.
Good.
How do you know the young student if soprano, for example, if she's not able to do the D, E, C, if it's a technique or if it's a limit? How do you know the limit of the voice or the technique or the
You mean how the actual range limitations?
Yes, if she's not able to do it, it is just technique question on how to do it, or what is her limit for the high notes. Do you understand my question?
I'm not sure.
She wants to know if she can't, if a student can't do it because she doesn't know how, or
You're
if she
talking
just
about flageolet?
physically can't.
Yes.
Yes.
Flageolet. And the flageolet?
Yes, flageolet, yeah. Yes,
Right.
flageolet,
Okay.
but if she's not able to do it, which is just because she
Well-
don't know the technique, or she don't have this note.
Well, there is a range limitation for each voice. In other words, the vocals can only elongates so far, and then that's as far as you're going to go. But mostly, if it's someone who has a limitation on the top, which seems an unnatural limitation, I find very much just what I did with somebody the other day in here, have them laugh in a high voice, and then just play the note on the piano, and inevitably they're far ahead of where they think they can sing. I mean, the pitch is much higher than what they ever dreamed they could sing. And if they can make that sound in laughter, they have to learn, and then it's a technical matter. I mean, there are physical limitations, and there's some people who really cannot do flageolet and are still good singers. They just can't manage that aspect of it. And sometimes people in courses will say, you know, I feel so discouraged because I can't do flageolet. Well, don't worry if you can. If it's useful to you, use it, and if it's not, don't worry about it, you know? I mean, there are other things besides flageolet. Somebody else had a hand up. I also have all these questions I want to answer. Yes?
I thought you mentioned yesterday that there might be times when a female voice might not do so much as this.
Yes.
That
All right, let me tell you. You can get away with raising the head with impunity. I mean, really, when you're in lower middle and even upper middle voice. But as soon as you hit the F sharp area, in other words, the only reason for not doing this is because of this action that's going on as the vocal folds are being stretched for the pitch. As the pitch mounts, as you get in the very high part of the voice, this rocking tilting is extreme and the head almost has to be in this position. Or, if you do this, you're going to violate that action. Secondly, you're going to lose the first forma because just as you can hear in the speaking voice, something happens. Secondly, or thirdly, whatever, is that we are used to hearing our auditory sense is related to this. It's not related to this. We don't listen to the world around us like this, nor do we speak like that. And therefore, you have a different auditory response, and you can't really manage it as well. And mainly the raising of the head is simply because people are unaccustomed to making high, loud noises without going, hey, like that, you know. And so it happens almost, whereas the soprano wants to raise her head, often begins around the C sharp, where the end of her speech inflection range is, and then, again, very much around the F sharp. And my point is that you can get away with it below those pitches. It's, as I said the other day, if I was singing, you know, singing to Rosina, saying, fine, but I can't do the high notes like that, or it'll be very, very thin and strained.
there's never a part of the range where that is helpful.
No. No. There's a very famous American pedagogue who has suggested that the head be in the sword swallowing position all the time, this, to free the larynx. Well, of course, you're not freeing the larynx at all. You're taking away all the support of the larynx. There's also the danger of doing this, but that is much less. Men sometimes get into that because they're trying to keep the larynx down. Yes.
I wanted to ask, you had mentioned about the C sharp with women, and you said, keep the head in the same position, don't let the neck go up. But what I wanted to ask was, is that also where you increase the energy? Because you had talked.
Sure. You realize if you were to lift a heavy object, you would never do anything which required energy with your head up like this, because the whole structure of the body is contrary to that, you know.
So do you increase the energy before the C sharp, so it's not so evident on the C sharp, or?
Now you're talking about, actually I don't think you have to worry very much about that area. The main area is up around the F sharp.
See, for me, it's C sharp.
It's a C sharp, right. Well, that's because that's your subdivision of your voice there. And you should, of course, increase the energy somewhat. Absolutely. And if you do this, remember, this is taking away all the energy. This is applying the energy. And I think that's a logical answer. Let's look at some of these questions. Let's hear. What's the best way to clear your throat without a lot of sympathetic pressures as possible? Again, Van Lawrence suggested that you do this. It's never been very helpful to me to blow air over the chords rather than bring the chords together to go.
Okay.
Maybe it does help. Yes. We shouldn't clear the throat because every time we clear the throat, however, when it's really, really sticky, you don't have much choice. But a lot of people get in the habit of being throat clearers all the time. They sing a few notes and then they want to clear the throat. Very often it feels like there's something in the throat.
You're gonna
There
get
isn't.
it.
There's nothing to clear. It's just a habit. But I do think that we have to be very, I like to do this. I like to go, thank you. I like to do, things like that. I think that helps clear the throat very much. And also, you know, ha, ha, ha. You're really getting the vocals are coming together in an easy way rather than so much throat clearing. All right. Do you have any good ear training exercises for people who are inconsistently flat? What might be some of the causes of that? Well, I assume that there's an occasional flat.
The sound is muffled.
Huh?
Sound isn't clear.
Your battery's dead. Ha ha.
Would you mind using this?
Okay.
And we'll get you a new battery.
Just take this Well, I don't really think that flatting is often a matter of the ear. I mean, well, let me qualify that. I think people get used to hearing themselves be a little bit flat and aren't aware of it. But I think that that's almost always a technical matter. And as I mentioned to you before, you can be on singing the right fundamental, you know, the pitch, and sound flat if the upper partials are falling. And you know how many times I've said in this course to people, the pitch is low or the pitch is high or whatever, and not because the person has a bad ear. It isn't really ear training they need. They just need to be aware of that pitch centering, which is largely a matter of the balance of the overtones. Yes.
With that, I think a lot of it for me is I try and listen to myself when I'm singing. Is there a way you can get out of it?
Yeah, okay. Now, that's a very good point. Now, I didn't stress this enough. I just mentioned it in passing to somebody in the master class, I think. But there was a researcher by the name of von Bekesi. He was Hungarian, a very noted researcher with auditory problems and so on. And he really did establish through his research, and I can't tell you exactly how it was done because I don't remember, but that about 50% of what we hear is internally and 50% externally through the external meatus, which is this. And I do feel, I have no real proof of this, but this is how I feel as a voice teacher. I think there are a lot of people who listen internally and they don't seem to listen externally. And they're sort of singing for themselves, and they think they're on pitch when they're not, because it sounds higher inside one's head in a certain way, I believe. And you know, if I'm singing, oh, it sounds very big inside my head and sounds on pitch, but it's probably a little bit flat. I think it's a good point. I think you have to make yourself listen externally as well. And there are a lot of, I've said several times in the course here that I felt somebody was too internalized in their sound. And it should be more externalized. And I think I like to say, listen on the outside as well. About this flatting. Well, I just think again that it's a matter of often people flatten descending phrases. Have you noticed? Very often it's the descending phrase, and of course, very often it's the conclusion of the phrase where the flatting occurs, and that's very much a breath management problem because people are running out of breath management control. What is considered a reasonable warm-up duration for beginners? Here again, there are some young males. Remember, I want to mention this. if a young man's voice changes when he's 14, and you have him when he's 18, his voice is 4 years old. And his female companion, if she's 18, has a voice that is 18 years old. That's why most young women sing a lot better than most men when they come into you, because of this tremendous difference in puberty, the changes of puberty. I have had a couple of people who were good singers who really, when they came in, it was a bit worrisome to me because they would be very tired after singing for 15 or 20 minutes, a young male. And I felt that we must be doing something all wrong. Well, no. I think it's just that you have to be very careful with a youngster. Some of them you have to just see them very briefly, let them only work for half an hour a day or whatever. With regard to a warm-up for advanced students, it's the same thing I said about the daily regimen. I think that one should have a specific warm-up regimen, not just go in and start running arpeggios and singing whatever, but build it beginning with the onset, with some humming, with the vowel definition, all of that. And my own, I do in about 25 to 30 minutes. And I want to do that every day. And I think that's about what one should have for a warm-up. What physically happens when you take the chest voice of passaggio? Well, see, remember this. When you're in the so-called chest voice, your vocal folds are at their thickest and fattest, like this. As you go up the scale, the vocal fold elongates and the mass diminishes. Now, if you're trying to carry chest voice up, you're trying to hold the thickness of the cord and using all the vocalis muscle rather than allowing the vocal fold to really do what it should do. And so therefore there's going to be a register violation, and that's why chest is very hard on the voice. If I go, oh, like that, I'm asking my vocal folds to sing that pitch while trying to retain the low voice mechanism. And so that's why that's a good idea. This was about the baritone martin. We already talked that. This says tenor qui signor. The tenor who is ignoring the fact that he's a tenor. There is a lot of that. Let's put it this way. I once wrote something about this. Why is it that there are so many lyric baritones in France and so many spinto tenors in Italy? Well, it isn't just the diet or one side of the Alps or the other. It has to do with attitude toward energy and language and so forth. And one of the perils of the French school, and I know quite a bit about it by now, is that, of course, the word is so important that sometimes the sound elements are not given enough stress, and the word is what has to be there all the time. And so, in other words, there are a lot of males who could be, as I mentioned before, lyric baritones or spinto tenors. And there are a lot of tenors, there are a lot of closet tenors, right? I guess that's the term. But on the other hand, if somebody is 28, 30 years of age and has been singing baritone and decides he wants to become a tenor, that's a difficult choice because it takes a couple years to make a transition, and it's already pretty late to do that, you know. And I really mean it. I think that there are people who could sing either as a lyric baritone or a tenor, and often the choice is a wise one to stay as a lyric baritone, because then the only tenor lyrics you're going to sing is the heavy spinto stuff, which is very, very hard to manage anyway. So, why is it physically impossible for a male to produce the flageolet register, and how does it relate to falsetto? Very good question. First of all, remember, when the male sings falsetto, the vocal folds have a slight gap, like that. The vocal folds have not yet come totally together. The flageolet is just the opposite. The vocal folds are not only together, but they're damped the whole way along the back part of the chord, and only the anterior, the front part, is vibrating. So it's like this. Second state.
Yeah.
I mean, so you got this, just the end is vibrating. The whole chord is damp. Now, I don't know if you had a chance in the lab the other day. Did you have anybody do the sort of Marilyn horn stuff of
Yeah, for better from high level.
Yeah, and you can actually see the vocal fold elongate and come back to its. And of course, in the flageolet, the vocal folds are as far elongated as you can make them when you hit the top pitch of your flageolet, and only the very end. Only the very end is working. Thank you.
Okay.
To what extent can one use voce finta and falsetto to develop or retain the voce piena in testo? Another very good question. Voce finta is not like falsetto because the vocal folds are together on voce finta. If I sang, that's voce finta. This is, and it's not really mezzo voce. It's just an unsupported vocal sound. And you know, falsetto is that's the falsetto, and the voce finta is what I used to the mezzo. And how can they be used to develop the top voice? Well, I'll tell you what. I think there are uses for falsetto, pedagogical uses. We didn't get around to that. I have some exercises in which I have people sing, like, particularly for young men, when they tend to go, to sing falsetto and then come out into voce piena. However, the problem is, did you have to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem is that many people mistake the fact that falsetto could be substituted for legitimate upper voice, and that's what the problem is. I mean, for example, there's a rather famous American singer, a moment. I had his name, it just escaped me now. Chris Merritt. Chris Merritt. Well, as you know, he got booed tremendously at La Scala because he used falsetto on the top. He uses reinforced falsetto. Instead of singing the high C, he goes, like this. Of course, everybody in Italy knows that's falsetto. But almost nobody gets away with that and does it. For example, Bierling told me he would never sing falsetto ever in public. Alfredo Kraus says the same thing. So did Nikolai Gedda told me that. On the other hand, you hear Gedda sometimes, and he has that wonderful ability to go out of voce finta in the full voice, and sometimes it sounds pretty falsetto-ish to me. But falsetto is useful, but it should not substitute for the upper male voice. Is that a sort of an answer?
You want to go ahead and take the break now? It's about 11:30, and then come back, or do you want to do another question?
10:30.
Oh, well, that's okay. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Do you want to?
We can take a break and come back.
We've been here for a minute.
But let me just follow along because I have these in order.
Okay.
How can you help a man to find his falsetto? This is a real problem. If you don't have a falsetto, you ought to find one, is my viewpoint in the male voice. And there are times when it's very, very difficult to get somebody who doesn't have falsetto to get one. They'll try and they go, Well, keep them at it, because I think that you need to have that freedom to be able to make that kind of vocal sound, and that there's always going to be a certain rigidity in the voice until you can. I don't know, I don't have an easy answer to that. How do you find it? I don't have an easy answer. Yes?
If they do this scale, from falsetto to voice, get the ease of the production, and they crack all the time, just keep at it. That's the only way to do it?
Yeah, but I'll tell you what else. Some people say that, that singing falsetto will remove the fear of singing high voice. And, it's not true, because we know it's a dodge. And also two ways, and I wish I were in better shape this morning, but let me try to illustrate something. If I do this, now I'm coming out, this is particularly if somebody's going like this, oh, you know, down. Another way to do it is this, to try to come out without the audible shift. So, and I try to do both with them, so that they can have because what's really happening is, of course, vocal folds, when I do this, you can hear them come together. That's what that is. Vocal folds are coming together in full closure, and I think there's a value to that.
If the student cracks at that moment, the only way to do it is just keep trying it.
Keep trying. Take it on a little lower or a little higher or whatever. Yeah. Now, the other thing that's related to this is the so-called countertenor. And 20 years ago, I refused to teach countertenors. We had a couple of auditions here at school who were really very, very good, probably turned out to be prominent singers. But I just didn't want to deal with that because I felt that the falsetto, first of all, there is a problem with falsetto, and when you teach a countertenor, you have to be especially careful with the breath management because of this gap. And you can have a reinforced falsetto where it comes closer, but it's still not the same thing. It's not the same voice. A young man just graduated from here that we had him singing as a countertenor. The countertenor, of course, is not some unusual and rare voice. Almost any male in this room who wishes to sing countertenor could learn to do it if you wish to, because it's not a special instrument. It's the imitation female voice in a male voice. And but for example, this fellow, whose name was Derek, did not really have a very interesting baritone voice. It was a very limited instrument, but he has quite a pretty sound in the falsetto. And so he's really, I imagine, and he's also a very highly geared person, and I think he's going to make his way as a countertenor. Daniels is the current one, you know. What's his first name? David Daniels, right. Of course, he was a student of George Shirley at the University of Michigan. And George told me, he said, you know, Daniels' baritone voice is not really interesting at all. And so he said, that's why we decided to try the falsetto, the countertenor. And I don't know if you've heard this guy or seen him he's been on TV a lot. It's highly energized. I mean, it's like that all the time. It's just highly energized. I would worry about that for health reasons. And Brodnitz, back, of course, when the countertenor was just coming into his own, so to speak, used to say that the average life of a countertenor is 6 years. Well, I don't think that's true either. But you see, it is not functionally the best thing to do with the voice, because you're having air passing over the vocal folds, not turned into tone. And of course, we know that's very bad. That's why you don't whisper when you have laryngitis. So that's another thing. Whispering is terrible on the voice. So we should not whisper when we have laryngitis to save ourselves. Should we take our break now?
So. About 12 minutes or so.
12, and so it's kind of a heavy duty, and if I didn't have these wonderful young people who are gung ho about the lab, I would be lost. But we have no technician, and usually we have about 5 student assistants in the laboratory. Rebecca's our chief coordinator of that, and they spend about, what would you say, 5 to 8 hours a week, each of you?
12.
More like 12, yeah. Right. Also, I should mention this to you, that the lab is self-supporting. I mean, in other words, Oberlin, although my dean has found funding from various places to help fill out some other grants that were given, some other monies that were given, we actually have no budget. We exist on outside contributions and funding from foundations that we write proposals for and so on. So it's a kind of a shoestring operation in a certain way, and I think it's pretty remarkable that we have what we have up there under those circumstances. But on the other hand, it's not like a regular laboratory where you can go in and work. Sometimes I get requests from people, well, I'd like to come and work in your laboratory for a week. But there's no way we can do that, you know, because we're not set up that way. We wish we were, and we'd love to do the spectrum analysis for all of you, but it's just there isn't time. We hardly get through what we have to do with the students. So that's why we can't do that. Okay, great. Okay, is it all right now?
Yeah.
Is it on?
We'll see.
And while we're doing that, when should you be on vocal rest? Laryngitis, absolutely. Anytime it's in the larynx, you should stop. And of course, you know, you can have laryngitis. Is it on now? Yeah, you can have laryngitis. And by pressing the vocal folds more firmly together, you can make a decent sound. You know, but you're going to do harm in the process. By the way, steroids. We didn't talk about that. You should really avoid steroids. I mean, I guess Tom spoke about that. Yes. Okay. I have a horror story on that. I was doing a dirty requiem once in Charlotte, North Carolina. There was a soprano from the Met who came, and she knew she was sick, but she figured, oh, what the heck, it's North Carolina, who's going to know? You know, it's not New York, and I can get away with this. And she sang the first section of it, and she got toward it sort of just before the pause. I forgot quite where that was, but she started to open her mouth and nothing came out. And so they called a doctor, and this has been about 20 years ago, and he shot steroids on her vocal folds. And she got through the performance very beautifully, but she didn't sing for 6 months after that. Because she'd done damage.
We're gonna have to go back to the hand mic first.
Okay. All right. I think it's a machine. And you can get away with that, you know. But if it's really in the throat, you ought not to. I'll try to get through this because we have still a number of things we'd like to get to. How do you raise the zygomatic arch without looking wide-eyed? Well, it's upright now, and I don't think I'm looking too wide-eyed. But the other thing is a lot of people have been trying to raise this and raise this. Maybe that's what was meant, right? And you just have to say, you know, disassociate these muscular actions. The best way I know to achieve that is to tell somebody, it's a very, 300 years old, breathe as though you're inhaling the fragrance of a rose.
Yeah.
When you inhale like that, this goes up. And the other confusion is that then, is that the same as the smile? No, it's not. The smile is that, and that's going to be too loud. How can we brighten a blue vowel that is too dark? I think the best way to do this is the little device I use with several people to say, I knew you, and to use the Y and the N, like knew you, because then you have, excuse me, you go from the most front vowel to the most back vowel. What should the teacher wishing for tenure have told the nasal young man? Could she have helped him in one lesson? Yes, she could have. If she had known that it was the velum, she could have had him, first of all, occlude his nostrils so that the velum would go up so he didn't hear the nasality, right? She could also explain that it was the velum, and she could have done K and Ka and things like that, which close and then open, and have done it. And also the na would be a very good cure for that particular problem. But she didn't know those things. This is sort of curious in a way. I noticed that you do not mention problems with the tongue. Do you prefer to go about it indirectly? No, I think I may not have always dealt with the tongue problem in the Masterclass, but we deal a lot with the tongue. That's why we do so much of the ve, and the va business, and the tongue point trills, and all of that. I mean, the tongue is vital, and that's why I have people take the mirror so much of the time and watch to see what the tongue's doing. Because the inner surface of the tongue should be in contact, the apex of the tongue should be in contact with the inner surface of the lower front teeth on all of the vowels, And so, we work quite a bit with that, actually. What type of food do you suggest eating before performance? Well, as I said before, non-salty stuff, and certainly, and how soon before performance should one eat? Well, my own rule is this. If I have an 8 o'clock performance, I eat at 5. I think you have to eat. I don't believe in just waiting until after the performance because the energy, because of the chewing and swallowing. But I think you should eat early enough so that your digestive system is not in your way. If a singer's jaw positioning involves an overbite, how much will this limit the vocal tract regarding shape and length as a resonator? And should orthodontic corrections such as resetting the jaw be considered to increase vocal potential? Again, this is from the Voice Foundation. Almost every doctor there is very much opposed to the breaking of the jaw and resetting to correct an overbite. I mean, most of us, you know, none of us is made perfectly, and there are a lot of little aberrations that go on. And I don't think the overbite is all that important. I really don't, as far as the total vocal tract. I had a young man who was in my studio until 2 years ago, who, although his friends were not aware of it, he could not close his lips because of his orthodontic situation. He always had to breathe through his mouth, that is, mouth and nose. And it was suggested that he have his jaw broken to reset, and he got a couple of other medical opinions, and we all decided not to do that. I think it's not a good idea. For cosmetic reasons, it may be, but not for vocal reasons. I have a number of students who have come to me with the technique that required that they tank up. The result is that their bodies are locked. How can I get them to let go of the tension of the rib cage? Well, this tanking up business, of course, is because of the high chest. And so, again, I would have the person lie down, as you saw me do with people, and show how the chest does not become involved in that action at all. The action is here. Stand them up and do the same thing. I think that's the best answer I could give to that, and work on it that way. This is very interesting, and I don't think it's the same person. How would you correct a student who tanks up, packs air, and then takes another shallow breath on top? The same kind of thing. It's all of this, you know, this business. And therefore, the more we concentrate on the lower abdominal area, and I repeat, lying down is a wonderful way to do it. In terms of body sensations, how does holding your breath feel differently than appoggio? Well, the appoggio, if you hold your breath, you've got this, you've got active tension here, which is stopping the airflow. That's why. And the appoggio is an entirely different feeling. First of all, it has nothing to do with the upper chest, it has only to do with this area and the area in the back. There's no chest displacement required. So I think it's a very different feeling. How can you help a very large, that is obese student find the appoggio? That is when you can't really feel the space between the rib and the crest of the iliac. Well, again, this is a very delicate subject, but I do believe that overweight obesity is a handicap for any singer. First of all, I know that when I am 10 pounds heavier than I am now, and I'm 10 pounds heavier than I often am right now, my breathing is not as good, my breath control is not as good. Because I think that it's just a matter of carrying that much weight around. As far as being able to find it, I have 2 people in my studio who are obese. One is a tenor and one is a returning soprano. She's a very big woman, and she's a very, very large person. And I simply do the same thing. We just fish in there till we find the bottom rib and say the action is here. And I want to say something about Pavarotti, for example. You know, he is a big man, but you know what? I have pictures of him when he was 22, when he was a soccer player. You know, he almost went into coaching. He was an athlete. And that musculature is still there, despite all the stuff that's around it. Nor does weight help you with resonance. putting on weight has nothing to do with resonance any more than if you put a pad around this piano, that doesn't help its resonance, you know. And a lot of times people think you have to be overweight to have the strength to sing or whatever. The ideal weight for singing is the ideal weight for living, you know. And I think you can help somebody like that to find where their approach should take place.
Is it true that a larger person, not necessarily an overweight or a fat person, has a bigger sound than a skinny person?
Indeed not.
No.
Indeed not. That's what I'm just saying. And here again, it's a delicate subject, but when I have overweight students, I do everything I can to convince them to lose weight. Because if they want a professional career these days, the visual is almost as important as the vocal. As a matter of fact, I just talked to a metropolitan singer, and it wasn't Christopher, relatively recently, who said the problem with the profession right now is that they're looking for nice, good-looking singers rather than good-sounding voices. And I really think that there's something to that. So it's part of the act. It's part of where we are these days. And it's important to try to encourage people to lose weight if they are obese. I have an 18-year-old female student with an unusually breathy phonation. She's been checked by an ENT and has no pathology to the cords. How can I address this? Well, you see, I think, again, airflow, I mean, if it's a breathy phonation, as I said, I would suggest onsets even with the glottal onset, like to try to help, the ka, all of those things, which then do not allow as much air immediately emission as she's probably using. It's the old approach again, it's the breath management thing, and it takes time, and that's another thing. It's the persistence of staying with it. Sometimes you make a suggestion to a student and it doesn't work, and then the teacher gives up. You've got to go at it all the time, and they have to go at the approach all the time. And it's not something people say, oh, but I don't feel anything there. Well, sure, maybe they will 2 months hence, or 4 months hence, or whatever, but you have to keep at it. Could you give us your thoughts on what factors may contribute to the epiglottis that doesn't move, as we saw in the x-rays? I guess the one that Hinkle was pointing out was actually my tenor, Limmy, and he thought the epiglottis did not move. I didn't see all those things. I think he has a rather stable epiglottis. I don't think it does a lot of up and down on the ahs, and I think most good singers don't do an awful lot of epiglottic movement. As I mentioned before, in speech it's the e, a, ah, o, u, and there some of that has to happen, but I don't think that a heavy glottal closure is desirable. That's what we do when we swallow. Epiglottis comes down. I don't really have an explanation for that. I assume it's true that particular singer seemed to have an epiglottis that didn't move much. But I don't have an explanation, except to say that I don't think the epiglottis should move as much as most people do. I think when you sing well, it tends to stay a little more erect. Why does one have excessive jaw movement up and down when sustaining a note? It's a lack of support. I suppose that person means the wagging jaw, that. Here's another related one that I put right next to it. What is the reason that there is sometimes a shaking of one's head or a shaking of the tongue? Well, as I mentioned the other day, and you often see it more in females. I'll just say it quickly. The larynx is attached to the hyoid bone from which the tongue is attached to the hyoid bone from which the larynx is suspended. Therefore, when you see the vibrato rate going, sometimes that's transferred slightly to the tongue or to the jaw. That's okay. But when you have business going on, then clearly it's jaw tension largely, and I think it is also possibly related to breath. But I think that the thing to do on that is I actually had one woman who had a tremendously shaking jaw, and first of all, I actually had her do this as she sang, first of all, to be aware, watching in the mirror, and using the video, and she got rid of the entire exception. Yeah, she got rid of that exception. Sometimes it would still come back around the passaggio.
That's it.
But it's a matter of directing attention to it and trying very hard to remind her not to wail the child. Rebecca, you had some of that problem.
Yeah.
And it's a lot better now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rebecca's not my student. She's with another teacher, a very fine teacher. But you've been working on that as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
What about in your case? What do you think?
Actually, I came here with a slower vibrato rate than I have now. And that slower vibrato rate actually went along with the wagging of my jaw.
Right.
Now that, of course, my breath management is improving, the jaw wagging has almost all gone away, and my vibrato rate is more consistent now. More consistent and faster, more appropriate for my voice.
This is true confessions. Well, this one is, how would you help the soprano who is not a coloratura sing the Mozart Alleluia successfully? I guess I'd start her on something else. But again, take the melismatic passages and do a bar or 2 bars of it, and do it in various keys, and then come back into the key and do it. I think. You plan this is interesting. You plan to publish a textbook for beginning class voice like Clifton Ware's book. Do you know Clifton Ware's book? Clifton Ware has 2 books out, and they're really very good. They're very good books. But no, I don't want to do a textbook for beginning class voice, because if I were teaching beginning class voice, there is a certain book that I would use. It's called Structure of Singing. Yeah. Because I think it doesn't matter whether you're in a voice class or a solo singer, whatever, the principles are all the same. Yeah. And I think you have to do the same stuff. Do I have a web page? No, we're getting a web page for the lab, aren't we?
Yeah.
And I don't use email. I have a good reason why I don't have an email address. I have a fax at home, but I don't give out my fax number. I use the conservatory fax number. Oh, well, I'll read it. Is there a mailing list for announcements of other Miller workshops? Well, no, but give me a call and I'll tell you. Oh dear. I don't know if it's the same person or not. And somebody likes me. Where might we look for regular articles by RM besides the Nats Journal? Well, that's the only place where I really have regular articles. I do have a couple of chapters in some books that have come out recently. And in the Journal of Voice, which is another magazine. Also has something in the Choral Journal not so long ago. But the Nats Journal is the only one where I'm a regular contributor. If the vowel has its own distinct laryngeal configuration, what occurs for a mixed vowel? Very good. Okay. The mixed vowels, for example, are for example, la lune in French, and Süß in German, and then Brücke in German, and then Car in French, and Goethe in German, and Schön and Bleu, right? Those are the mixed vowels. And what happens there is when you say, for example, la lune, you have your tongue is in the E position and your mouth is in the U position. So what you're doing in a certain way is kind of assuring that there will be some importance from the back vowel series and from the front vowel series of the harmonics. The same is true with the And I like to use sometimes. I don't think I did it right here in this chorus with anybody, but I often use to get the feeling of the front vowel position, which will then go into the back vowel position. So in short, in a certain way, you combine both sides of the phonetic street. When you say you've got your tongue, I repeat, in a round position, and the tongue in a lateral position, and the mouth in a rounded position. And that's what happens technically. Is there any truth to the theory that a singer who is aware of the direction and length of the musical phrase will manage his breath more efficiently than due to his musical understanding? Oh, sure. I mean, I think, on the other hand, it doesn't matter if the phrase is short or the phrase is long. It's the same breath preparation. I mean, there is no such thing as a half breath. There's no such thing, should be no such thing as a catch breath. Should always be, but I do think, indeed, I mean, when you're going to sing Brahms and you have a tremendously long phrase one after the other, of course your understanding, your musical understanding is going to also dictate the awareness of the breath. I think if the voice box oscillates for the trill, would there be any advantage in practicing a trill like this? And then starting with the quarter note, going to the eighth note, and then to the triplet figure. You mean on alternate pitches?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is.
The Nocta?
Huh?
The Nocta did those trill exercises just like that.
Yes, I think there's advantage to that. I mean, I'll be perfectly frank, I don't have a great deal of success in teaching the trill. I try it, and I try to trill myself, because I think any singer ought to be able to trill. And I can trill below my primo passaggio. I can trill from C sharp 5, written C sharp 5, on down. That's really C sharp 4 in my voice. But I can't trill above it. And I'm not going to demonstrate it either. And then the lip trill be of any real value. I think I certainly don't think it's harmful in any way, but I just think the lip trill is so overdone. There's some studios in New York where that's what you do. You lip trill, and that's about it. And then all the people go,
Not very much.
and as though that were... The other thing, what it does is, frankly, it raises the larynx. Look, the larynx has to go up when you do it. And there's one teacher in New York at a very famous school who tells everybody that that's the way you strengthen the vocal ligament. There's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. Right.
I had a voice class when I was in Boston that had to do with voice and voice lip trill, and it helped me a lot in breathing, where you would do a trill and have it in voice and go through.
How did it help you with breathing?
It just, it helped my support. Maybe it's a mental thing, but it helped me a lot.
Okay.
In the same way as using the voice as or a voiceless as, just the very dynamic of the airflow can sometimes be useful.
Yeah, with the lip trill, the lips really can't trill unless the air is moving. That's one thing that I was...
Yeah, but your jaw is closed.
Sure. Yeah. Getting rid of it, are you saying? Oh no, absolutely false. Absolutely false. First of all, you never get rid of all the air that's in your lung. There's 30% of it is residual. You can't get rid of it, even when you're dead. It takes a while for it to come out. And you have, we never went through this, we could have, but there are various forms of breathing. In other words, you have a capacity, you have vital capacity, which you can never get rid of, and you can measure that vital capacity, but you never really can measure it totally because you always have residual breath. And what you don't do is try to get rid of all the breath. Indeed, you don't. You renew, you replenish what you have used. And that's, a lot of people are always trying to get the breath out. Exercise, I do not understand people who do things like this. To get all the breath out of the lung. It isn't how much breath you can get out. It's what you do, how you can manage to keep it literally in. not by holding it, but by eliminating excessive airflow. I mean, the breath is flowing all the time. You can't keep the air from flowing. You don't have to start the air flowing. That's also true of these people who think that you have to, I've actually heard it said that you have to move the air from here to here. As though there were a column of air, there's a column of breath here. There is no such column of breath there. You've got a trachea, you've got the bronchi, you've got the lungs, you've got the vocal tract. And the air is immediately moving as soon as after you inhale, right away the breath is already moving. You can't stop it from moving, but you can retard its rapid exit. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This is a constant problem. I don't think we're going to get anything done with the questions, but that's all right. Please comment on what to say to students who are singing in our college choir and are being asked to sing with little vibrato, and they are asked to punch every note in Bach melismas. It's a real problem, isn't it? Yeah. My answer to that is get a new choral conductor. I'm being halfway serious. At Oberlin, we had a tremendous problem here for a period of time in recent years with someone who insisted everything had to be straight and all this, ha articulation. And this person is no longer with us. And we have a choral person right now who is taking us back to the good old Bob Fountain days when we had, because this is a person who allows them to sing. And it's a glorious sound. It's getting better every semester. And I must tell you, I am not happy with ACDA, the American Choral Directors Association. I think it's based on a whole lot of people who have adopted nothing but the Lutheran Scandinavian vocal sound and have imposed that on young people. In my pedagogy course recently, I even showed a picture from the Choral Journal of somebody inviting children to a camp where they could all go like this. That's the way, come and learn how to sing, it said. Well, I'm not very nice about that. I think what you have to do is tell your student to fudge as much as possible, and if possible, try to take their, what we've done at Oberlin, and because of these recent years, we actually changed the requirements so that they could take it in various ways. They could have one of the semesters, you have to take something every semester. So if you take 2 semesters in opera chorus, where you can sing. You can take it in musical union, which is the symphonic chorus. You can do it in ensemble. For example, several students will get together and do the Brahms Liebeslieder waltzes, something like that, or the Schumann ensemble stuff. And so then they only spend about 4 semesters, some of them, in the college choir. But now it's changed. Now people are not as worried about that. So you can change your requirements some way too. How do you work with young tenors who have few or no high notes? Well, gradual process, half step by half step, right? I've had tenors who really came in with nothing more than an E flat on top and who end up singing C's. I mean, I think you all have. And it's a matter of, it's a hard road, but it's semester by semester and month by month. Going just as we did the bum ba dum be dee da bum bum ba bum be dee da bum, those exercises. A young baritone has been diagnosed by the ENT with functional dysphonia. I think we answered that. I think we talked a little bit about that. How do you deal with jaw tension? Well, one of the best ways, again, I feel that most tension in the voice, singing voice, comes either from the jaw, the tongue, or the neck, other than down here, if you're not talking about breath management. And the thing is to move each of those independently, including the jaw. If you have a person with jaw tension, have them go rapidly moving the jaw back and forth, and then stop the movement. If it's the tongue, have them actually move the tongue back and forth. Yeah, be sure that will sometimes ease it. Also, with the neck, shake the head. I use a lot of that because people who have tension. What about the student who comes in for the first time and there's a gapping hole in the middle voice? You pray. Well, I'm assuming this is a female.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you find out where that hole is, and it's probably around the C or the C sharp in the middle voice, or possibly down around the E if it's the lower voice. And just, Matt, the same exercises that we've been doing, like fa-da-da-da-dum, be-dee-da-da-dum, over and over and over again. I think it's the only answer. Where's her hole?
It starts just above the primo passaggio, right around E, and goes
Yeah.
up through C.
Yeah. Yeah.
And after that, it starts to clear up. But in that,
Right.
What do you mean?
Well,
Sounding scared.
as I say, pray. Pray and work on it.
just a possible follow to that.
Ooh,
Is there any chance that you could have some damage?
Well, why don't you have her looked at? I would have her looked at. How do you find resonance balance in the vowel? I guess we dealt with that one, right? Okay. Well, are there any doctoral or master's programs you would recommend in vocal pedagogy in the U.S.? Well, there is a new one being established out of Belmont for the masters, and this is largely due to Dr. Shirley Zielinski, who some of you know because she's been in these courses for many, many years, and she has actually duplicated our laboratory quite almost exactly. And she has just started a master's program in pedagogy there, and I think it's going to be a strong one. I believe Eastman offers one as well in pedagogy. And there are some very fine teachers at Eastman, some of them my students. So I shouldn't mention that because they're our chief competitor, but Eastman. As women teachers, how do you get male students to energize going into the passaggio without pushing or straining? Well, I mean, I would suggest, again, if they're really pushing, use the falsetto exercise that I just demonstrated, might be useful to you. I think the same thing is true with the males who are teaching males. I mean, if you have somebody who's pushing in the passaggio area, you've got a problem. You have to find ways to mitigate it. I think that's such a terribly involved question. I don't know quite how to answer it because it's a very because pushing comes from everything is wrong about the breath management, about the jaw posture and so on. Usually, yes.
Then how would you suggest a soprano to go about teaching a tenor voice and covering the passaggio points?
You can't illustrate.
Yeah, I know, you can't illustrate. The point is, a male can sort of illustrate for a woman because we can use the falsetto.
Right.
And a woman should by no means use her chest voice to illustrate what's going on in the male voice. I would not do that. However, I mean, that raises almost a point. I do think that women can teach men just as well as can men if they understand the principles. And I think you just have to, you can't do the modeling, but I think you can use the same principles and talk about them. And I really do believe that there are, female teachers who teach men just as well as male teachers. I think the other side of the coin is true too. I think men can teach women just as well as women can teach women. This is a hard question to answer. If it's a whole lot of tension in the passaggio area, I would start myself, whether teaching a man or woman, with such things as I've said already. I would have them lying down. I would have them breathing properly. Start with the whole process of the breath management, because I think when there's tension, tremendous tension in the passaggio area, there's probably tension elsewhere in the voice. And it's the total picture. There's something wrong with the production, and I'd start right, I guess, with the basic, which is, in my way of thinking, the appoggio itself. This is about, I'll read it. You emphasize that the total body is the singing instrument. What movement training, awareness exercises, etc., have you found to be particularly beneficial to singers? So sorry. What would be your chief considerations in developing a movement training program in a school specializing in preparing singers for performance work. Comment on the Feldenkrais and the Alexander techniques. Well, first of all, let me answer that part first. There are as many different Alexander teachers as there are voice teachers. I mean, quite frankly, if you get a bunch of Alexander teachers together, you're going to have more controversy than you have when you get a bunch of voice teachers together. And I have the 4 of the Alexander books. I got them because people always kept saying to me, "Oh, you're an Alexander teacher, aren't you?" And I said, "No, I'm a Lamperti teacher." So I finally got the books and read them to find out what's going on. And if it's alignment we're talking about, of course, that's very, very good, and that's what a lot of the Alexander is about. On the other hand, there are some Alexander teachers who tell you that this has to go up and this has to go down. That's not what Alexander said. He even has a picture in a book in my studio, which he's got his hand exactly what I do on the back of the head of a person like this, to keep the head in an axial position. Feldenkrais is a very, and boy, you should hear the Feldenkrais and the Alexander people go at each other. Because they feel that the Alexander is manipulating muscular actions, whereas the Feldenkrais feels that it comes from a totality thing. My own answer on all that is, I think, as you know, we did very little of it here, but I have people walk back and forth as they sing. I have them feel, stand, and everything, and so I think the movement is important. I also think I like to have students, if they can, take body movement courses in the college. I like to have people take fencing when that's available. I don't think we have a fencing instructor at the moment, but I've had that in the past. I think it's important, but after all, isn't it all simply axial body posture is basically what you're after?
Sure.
We're almost finished here, I believe. Yeah, how does one lift the zygomatic arch without smiling? Well, like this. I'm not smiling. I have a pleasant look in my face, but I'm not doing this. And so it's not, it's yaw, now I'll drop it, yaw. I have a change in timbre. So this can come up without that going that way. Does adding a small amount of air to the sound help with pressed phonation? Well, you know, if somebody is really pressed, I suppose you can do the sigh and so on. I mean, there are some people who build their whole technique on the yawn sigh, you know, that. He's a very famous teacher who advocated this. His name was William Bernard. And, but did you ever hear him sing?
No, he couldn't sing. He couldn't sing. Did you take him? Yeah.
And because that's airflow. If you sigh and yawn and put breath in, you're actually mixing breath in. I suppose if somebody's very pressed, you might ask for a breathy phonation to correct it. But I don't believe that we should do too much with compensatory things. I think you got to get it right. And if it's a pressed phonation, then find out why it's pressed. What are they doing wrong? Is it tension in the torso? Is it tension in the abdominal wall? Are they squeezing something? Which is probably the case. And then, rather than to mix air, I suppose as a kind of, what should I say? Well, as a sort of extreme measure, you could probably mix some breath. Oh, I'd love to discuss this for an hour. Would you discuss the British boy choir tradition and how they achieve their unique sound? Yeah, they're all, you know, the totally straight, the so-called cathedral tone, the right? Well, first of all, there are two traditions. Even in England today, it's coming around to this. There's the European, Middle European boy choir tradition, which is the Vienna Boys Choir kind of sound. And then there's this hooty thing that the British, often in the Church of England, choirs have done. And what they're doing, of course, is holding out all vibrancy. A child will have a vibrato if you let him have it. If he knows if he's energized in singing, he'll probably have it. I have a recording of UC Bjorn at the age of 10 with a very beautiful vibrato. I was a boy soprano, and I had definitely a vibrato. And in fact, my father was always proud of the fact that I used to sing on the radio a lot, and that his friends would say, that can't be your son, that has to be your 18-year-old daughter, because I was 6 and I had a big voice. And I'll tell you what else. People said to me, well, how did you learn to sing? And I said, oh, I just imitated Agnes McCarthy. And Agnes McCarthy was the church soloist. She was the soprano soloist at our church. And she sang, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Oh, I thought it was marvelous. So I went around singing, the Lord is my light. And so that was my vocal model then. What was this? Oh, yes, about the British choral tradition. Sorry. Not only is it in the British boy choir tradition, but then it comes over into the British soprano herself.
Yeah.
And so you hear very often this sort of so-called pure sound. First of all, listen to all the recordings of the boy choirs. Go over to the bookstore and listen to them. There isn't a single one in which the boys are not sharp. They're always above the pitch. It's always above the pitch. Why? Because that's airflow. They're taught to flow air, to make airflow instead of allowing the voice to be vibrant. How many boys have ever come out of those traditions become singers? Almost no one. It's very interesting. Very few professional singers have ever been in both choirs and made it as professional singers.
Was one of them.
What's his name? Peter Schreier did. Yeah. But there again. No, I'm serious. There again, it's a very high airflow voice. Yeah.
Could you discuss the difference between the young male voice and falsetto with the older man?
Well, I mean the pre-pubertal voice, yeah, is very much like the female voice, of course, and they're not using falsetto.
Right.
They're not holding their vocal folds apart. They're just using their instrument because it's still a small larynx. It sounds like a female. Yeah. I think we answered the questions.
Mr. Miller?
Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking about the on the side, the same people that do a lot of the on the side often build the voice on the ooh. Would you talk about
on what?
On the ooh?
Yes. Right. Well, the whole reason for that, of course, is that what you're doing with that is removing all the upper partials. There are people who they want the voice to sound like a flute. And the voice isn't a flute. And the reason they want to sound like the flute is the flute only has 3 basic overtones. So they remove everything. So they think that sounds pure. And it's impure. That's why it's so bad. I mean, and when you do the ooh, of course, what you're doing is removing all the upper parts. When you sing straight, what you're doing is removing. It's almost impossible to sing straight tone and have a good spectrum. You saw, for example, with that Baroque singer that we had here on the Styles tape, she was doing all that ooh, you couldn't find a spectrum because there's not enough harmonic response to the production.
Is there any use for it at all, doing a lot of the pure oohs?
I don't see any.
You don't see any?
No. Do you?
Well, one of my teachers who happens to be a soprano from Elena Nicolaidi School of singing, that was kind of her gimmick was.
Right. Oh God. I mean, we've got a lot of doves around my house. I wouldn't do that. I think that's abomination. I really do, forgive me, but I think that's just what we don't need. And I think that yawn sigh stuff is just, there's a very famous teacher in New York City who is retired from Juilliard and not a moment too soon, who you know who I mean. But who sings? Do any of them sing? They don't come out singing. They come out yawn sighing. Right. Yeah, that's supposed to relax the vocal folds. That's malfunctioning. Yes, ma'am.
And how much do you explain to your students why you're giving them something to do?
Why?
Why you're giving them a certain exercise or a certain vowel?
Oh.
Do you explain all the time?
Yes.
This is in order to...
Oh, yes. In fact, very often I say, well, what is this exercise for? I mean, there's a tape this covering the low male voice. And I over and over say to people, why are we doing this exercise? What is this exercise for? Explain to me what the exercise is for. Because I think it's the only way to teach. I never give an exercise, I don't think ever, without explaining what it's for.
Yeah, I know Mr. Miller always says, if you're gonna, don't sing unless you know why you're doing it. You know, just you might as well not even if you don't know why you're doing it.
You got a funny teacher.
This is a question having to do with literature. What are your guidelines for selecting appropriate literature for students? Taking the beginning students, advanced students, to develop sound technical.
Right. Well, first.
When you introduce operatic literature.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I like to give everything to a new student in English and Italian. I try to avoid very much French and German and Spanish, and certainly Russian and so on. And I try very hard to have them sing their own native language. And I teach in France, I want them to sing in French and in Italian, and so on. And the same way with the German-speaking people, because I think one has to deal with one's own language first of all. So I use a tremendous amount of Handel in my studio. And I use a lot, for example, with young people, things like the Haydn canzonettas, those and things of that sort. I use a great deal of that with young people. How many arias have you ever sung?
Like 2.
And you're a junior?
I'll be a junior, yeah.
Yeah, you'll be a junior, right. I don't usually use arias in the first couple of years. I mean, sometimes somebody will come in who's really capable of doing it, but I say this over and over, you don't learn to sing on arias. I mean, that's sort of, after you learn how to sing, you do the arias, in my viewpoint. And so we do a lot of rather limited repertoire. Now, if they've had German in high school or something, or had French, that's different. And we do an awful lot of lieder in my studio, and we do a lot of mélodie. I do have a great many people who, of course, want to be in opera. By the time they get into junior, senior year, they're doing a lot of operatic material, as a rule, if they can. And, of course, it's hard to find. One of the hardest persons to find repertoire for is the actual bass, the young bass. And even, am I making that noise?
Just pull it down a little. That's good.
And the young baritone. For example, sometimes you give a young baritone with his really bass material because he can't yet, one has to, because he can't yet cut the tessitura. To give a young baritone foray is often just like strangling them because the tessitura is so high in the baritone keys, and I think I don't know, you just have to use careful judgment about it. I do have, every one of my students has a technique book, and we've used it less thoroughly since we use so much of the TV camera, and they have their lessons recorded, but I've always put in, I don't hand out a bunch of exercises. I don't have them go to anything I've written and do all those exercises in a row or something. When the student comes in and sings, we do what we call a little protocol with them, have them sing, see what they do well. I write things down and share it with them. I say, okay, the E vowel is very good at this part of your voice and bad at this part of your voice, or whatever. And, you're handling this well, or whatever. And then I have, just like we do with our systematic technique, they all have the same little book. They get it at the co-op. It's an empty book. And we start with the breath management stuff, put a certain number of exercises in there. Every few weeks, add a few more. The vowel definition, we add a few weeks there. We add a few exercises there, passage, and so forth, as they go. And then, my point in mentioning that is that then in the back of the book, at the beginning of every semester, as soon as I know the student, spell out the whole semester's repertoire for them, so that it's a good balanced diet. So it isn't just what they have to hear and bring in, or what they want to do. And I try to have it as the years go by, have it properly divided so that they have lieder, they have melody, they have art song, they have an oratorio aria or two, an operatic aria or two. So I try to get a balance like that, pretty much. And sometimes it's hard. For example, this young man sitting here, as I told you when he came in, he said he has a nice voice, but he had a very limited range. And he wasn't sure he was a tenor or baritone. He'd been studying as a baritone, and then he went to a teacher who thought he might be a tenor. Well, he's a tenor. But he does not have easy entrance in the upper voice yet. But he's gradually getting it. And now we can vocalize to a B flat.
C's now.
C's now, good, okay. And so that's all coming. But we did a lot of things, for example. With him, I used a lot of what was his name? Why can't I think? Your German stuff that we just did recently. Not Carpe.
Max Reger.
Max Reger, yeah. A lot of Max Reger literature, because much of that is middle voice. Anybody, you can use it for, also we did, this poor man went through a whole lot of Max Reger literature because it was very appropriate for his particular situation. And so you can find stuff like that, but it is a task to find good literature for the right literature for the people, yes.
Would you talk to the choral conductors amongst us? Tell us what to do. We've heard a lot about the things that choral conductors do wrong. What do you think about?
You know what I think? I think that the same exercise, first of all, I think that there is I think there are several in America, I'm talking about USA now, there are several trends of choral tradition. There is what I mentioned, this Scandinavian Lutheran one, which came from Christiansen and the old St. Olaf school, where everything had to be straight tone. Although all the soloists, when I was a little boy, I saw old Hans Melius with his choir. I really saw the original, I was about 14. And remember I said to my mother, because we went to hear them, I said, well, why do the soloists all sing with a vibrato and the other people all sing straight? Which I think was pretty smart. And that's the question. Choral music is vocal music. Why shouldn't it be vocally as well produced, And what I really think is that there is that tradition. Then, as you know, John Finley Williamson with Westminster Choir tried another tradition. He said he was going to have 40 solo voices in a choral group. Well, Palestrinas ended up sounding like Puccini, So that didn't seem to be the answer. The best choral conductor that I've ever known was Robert Fountain, who was here at Oberlin for years, who was himself a singer, and who went through and got a vibrant sound out of his entire choir. And then there's Robert Shaw, and I think Robert Shaw said something very, very wise. He said, don't try to blend voices, balance them. He said, balance the voices. Don't try to make them sound like one voice. He said, you don't expect the flute to sound like the violin and the violin to sound like the trumpet. You balance them in an orchestra. And he said, you balance the voices into a choral work. And I think that was a very wise statement. I wrote a little article, it happens to be in a book called On the Art of Singing as well, which I called it The Solo Singer in the Choral Situation, or something like that. And I mentioned this. I mentioned also that I think that you can use the same exercises with your choir as far as the onset, the vowel definition, and so forth, and with very good results. It is difficult, and I don't mean to malign choral conductors. I just feel that, let me tell you what I think the big problem is. Do you know that you can go through a program in almost any school of music in America as a pianist and get a degree in choral, you're going to get a music education degree in choral in voice. And you take a semester of voice or something, and you play the piano, and you know nothing about the voice, and you go into the public school and you teach choral music.
Exactly.
That's the problem right there. And I admire any choral conductor who attempts to learn something about the voice. I think that's the answer. And the other thing is, there used to be a tremendous choral tradition in the southern part of this country because of the big churches and big church choirs, and every church had really a musician in charge of the program, and sometimes several musicians, the organist, the choir conductor, and they taught voice and so on. That all seems to have faded away. It's such a pity. Well, I'm not answering questions.
Yes, sure.
I do want us to vocalize a bit before we stop. Yes.
I just have one question with regards to choir.
doing, and I did conduct choirs for a period of time. As a matter of fact, I got through my schooling by being a organist choir director in a number of churches. And then, as I say, I've done it at the university level. I would simply start with the same kind of stuff that we've been doing in 4 parts. So that, just as we did with the onset, where we sang in parts, I would do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I would like us to sing a bit. Would you like to sing a bit? Yeah. Now, before we do that, because I'm afraid I might forget. Yeah, before I do that, I might forget this. I want these 2 characters to stand up.
Yeah.
And down, and kick the legs a bit, and very quickly we'll do this, a little windmilling, a little flying.
Careful me. Hey, move over.
Awake and alive, and how about a little wood chopping, way back and way down. Several times, right, a little dancing, and then put the hands up over the head, bring it down, find the bottom of the rib cage.